This is a one-speaker meeting. Please welcome our speaker tonight, Steve.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve, and I am an alcoholic. Wow. Thanks, Richard, for asking me to share tonight. I haven't been feeling well, but but with a crowd like this, it's pretty groovy to be here. So anyway, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, and I did a bunch of other drugs too. So let's see. I think I was an alcoholic before I ever took a drink, and I come by the disease honestly. My mother was an alcoholic. My dad never made up his mind whether he was an alcoholic, but I know there was a time when he was living on vodka and amphetamines. I used to watch my grandfather fall down drunk a lot. I still have his copy of the second edition of the Big Book, although he never quite got this program. And you know, I had a pretty miserable childhood. Like a lot of us sort of felt like I didn't get the instruction manual. And then when I was 15 years old, I got high for the first time. It started with pot, and it was good. And then I started drinking pretty immediately thereafter, and it was like I'd found what I was waiting for, and I was off and running. You know, from the time I was 15 years old, I drank and drugged till I puked and passed out. That was just the whole deal. Yeah, I did other drugs. I grew up I was in high school in the mid-'70s in Orange County, so there was not much to do besides drugs. And I did everything that didn't require a needle. I was scared of needles, but I got over it eventually. You know, I don't know if I would be alive today if it weren't for drugs and alcohol, because I grew up in a fucked up family and I didn't have skills to cope with shit that was going down. And I really think drugs and alcohol provided an escape that I needed. And they worked for a long time. Well, not as long as I thought they did, but you know, I hear some people say that their worst day sober is better than their worst day drinking, and toward the end, I guess that was true, but overall, you know, I'm glad I got to see Pink Floyd in concert on really good LSD. The drugs were working then. And I got through all of high school and college smoking pot and doing anything else I could get my hands on from the time I came to in the morning till the time I passed out at night. And I did pretty well in school, amazingly enough, because I was smart, which doesn't necessarily work well for you in this program, but we'll talk about that later. And so I finished college and went to law school, and that's when I found out that suddenly smoking pot wasn't going to work out real well with school, because those case books I had to read in law school, even without getting high first, I'd have to read the same paragraph 3 times and still not know what it meant. And that's when cocaine appeared, which did work better with studying law. And I went to USC Law School, and they had some like clubs and fraternities at the law school there, and they had like kegs of beer and upside down margaritas and shit on the steps in front of the law school every day for the first 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, I figured that would work for me, and it did until I realized that I hadn't taken any notes for the first month of my contracts class, but I'm not sure it would have helped anyway. You know, by the time I graduated from law school, the drugs were not really working that well anymore. I was pretty much miserable, and I remember I studied for the bar exam at the bar. I mean, it was the first time I really had a lack of structure in my life, and I was supposed to study on my own. And I lived in Santa Monica Canyon at the time, and I would wander down the steps about noon and leave my study materials at home and order a pitcher of beer, and the pitcher magically kept filling itself all day long. And then my friend who had the blow showed up, and we played pinball and snorted lines and drank. And I didn't pass the bar the first time, but I did pass it the second. And, you know, it was about then that I started losing jobs and apartments and friends and lovers and stuff because of my drinking. And I remember thinking that the drugs and the alcohol weren't the problem. They were still the solution for me. It was all of you people who were the problem. And if you'd just leave me the hell alone, I would be fine. You know, again, I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous because my grandfather had gone to meetings, but my idea of an alcoholic was that an alcoholic had to be lying in the gutter, drinking out of a paper bag, and pissing himself, and I was waiting for that to happen. I now realize, looking back, that I did all three of those things, but probably not at the same time. Okay, big secret, or it was for a while. One of the ways I felt different for a long time was I realized by the time I was about 12 years old that I was gay. Yes, I'm a homosexual. And if that makes any of you straight guys nervous, get over it, because you got nothing to worry about. So shortly before I got sober, I met this guy at a bar, and I was about to lose one more place to live, and I'd been living in a garage down in Ocean Park in Santa Monica, you know, smoking cocaine and drinking myself to death, and waking up and seeing my breath before I got out of bed. And I was about to leave that lovely living situation to move in with my mother. I'm sure one of us would have killed the other if that had happened. So I met this guy and moved in with him pretty quickly. And it was a real amazing experience because for the first time I lived with somebody who drank and used more than I did. We'll call him Jim because that's his name. And a couple of you know him. And yeah, it was weird because he would come home from work and take one of those big plastic tumblers from McDonald's and go to the freezer and dump vodka in it till it was about an inch from the top and throw in a few ice cubes and float a little Mountain Dew on top for color, and knock back about half of it before he even took off his shoes. And like I said, I'd never been around anybody who drank more than that. In fact, he kind of got sloppy when he got drunk. So I just had to sort of keep up with him so I didn't notice as much. And the poor guy was, he'd never lived with anybody before except his mother, who apparently didn't do street drugs. Because he lived next to a girl who was really proud of herself because she had stopped using cocaine by switching to crystal meth. And in order for her to have somebody to stay up all night and play Battleship with her while she picked at her scabs, she would give him all the free crystal he wanted. And he would leave for work in the morning with drugs on the table and be surprised when he got home and they weren't there. You know, I did the drugs till they were gone. And of course, I mentioned he was going to work in the morning. By that time, I was unemployed and unemployable. And not long after I moved in with him, I remember going grocery shopping, and I had limited funds. I was collecting unemployment, so it was like buying the alcohol first at the grocery store, and if there was money left over food. So I always bought, again, there had to be one of those big 1.75 liter bottles of vodka in the freezer at all times. And so that's what I bought first. And I'll never forget the time that I went to pull it out of the freezer and it had frozen solid. And I panicked and looked real closely, and it said diluted vodka was what I'd bought on sale. I didn't know that shit existed. And I said I panicked, but then you should have seen me when I figured out it wasn't going to fit in the microwave. But I filled the sink with hot water quickly and saved the day. So I met this guy, Jim. I met him on Halloween and moved in within a couple of weeks. And by sometime in November, I remember saying, our drinking and using is really starting to scare me. And we really need to do something about this after the holidays. Because, the holidays. And Thanksgiving came and went, and Christmas came and went, and I remember we had a party on New Year's Day, and there's still pictures of that somewhere, and there's nobody home when you look at my eyes in those pictures. And I disappeared at one point and went to the bar to score Coke and invite a bunch more people over, and it was ugly. And before I knew it, it was somewhere in the middle of January, and the holidays were over, and I realized I hadn't said anything, and he hadn't said anything, and I was kind of scared to bring it up again. And I remember about that time a friend of mine called. He's a friend who worked in the film industry and always came back from location shoots with really good drugs and shared them. And I was kind of annoyed because he hadn't been around in a while. And he called and said, the reason you haven't heard from me is because I've been going to these meetings and I'm not doing cocaine anymore, and I can't hang out with people who do. And I think it was 8 in the morning, and I was drinking NyQuil to try to come down or something, and I kind of said, I need to do something about that too, eventually. So on the 24th of January, well, I don't know what the hell date it was. Somewhere in mid-January, Jim did me the favor of having a crystal meth-induced psychotic break. I woke up in the middle of the night and he was like screaming and slamming doors, and it scared the shit out of me. And the next morning, I very sanctimoniously informed him that this had triggered my Al-Anon issues. And that I was going to go to an Al-Anon meeting. And here's the first miracle of the program for me. That was all I had intended to say, but my lips kept moving. And the words that came out were, unless you want to go to an AA meeting, and if you do, I'll go with you. And of course, the asshole said he wanted to go to an AA meeting. So I called my friend Phil, who said he'd been going to these meetings, and told him that Jim really needed a meeting. This was a Wednesday, and he said, well, I'm going to a Cocaine Anonymous meeting at the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard tonight. I don't think the meeting's even there anymore, but I said, well, cocaine isn't really the problem. But he assured me that I'd find some alcoholics there too. So we went, and I'm pretty sure that at one point they went around the room and I said my name's Steve and I'm an alcoholic or a cocaine addict or both, and it didn't feel like a lie. The only other thing I remember about that meeting was that the man who spoke had done a lot more cocaine than I had, and I was envious. I'm sorry, I take that back. That's not the only thing I remember. What I remember is feeling a little spark of hope that there were people here who had felt like I felt and had found a solution and had come out the other side. And I hadn't had a spark of hope for a long time. I just felt like I had been juggling so many plates in the air all at the same time. And like I said, if you ask me, I was fine, but I was so far from fine. I was pretty miserable. So the meeting ended, and we thanked Phil for taking us to the meeting, and Jim said, you know, I'm kind of thirsty, and I said, yeah, if we get to the bar in the next 45 minutes, the dealer will still be there. And so we went to the bar and drank cocktails and did lines and talked about how cool it would be to get sober. And Phil told us about this Saturday meeting at noon, and so Jim and I made a plan. By the way, if you're new and you still have a plan, please feel free to share it with us after the meeting because we could use a good laugh. But so we came up with this plan. There was an Al-Anon meeting at the same place right before the CA meeting, and so we planned to go to both. We had a little goodbye party for all our favorite drugs and alcohol the night before. Smoked a couple joints, did a couple lines. He drank vodka, I drank scotch. And then went to bed early because we had a big day. I did go to the Al-Anon meeting. I don't remember anything about it, and I didn't go back to another one for more than 10 years. Although it did eventually save my life too. But you know, when the CA meeting was starting, I remember hearing all this noise in my head about, you know, because again, I did not meet the only requirement for membership at this point. I did not want to stop drinking and using. Jim was the one with the problem. And so the committee in my head was like, well, what do you do if Jim doesn't stay sober? And how will you know if Jim doesn't stay sober? No. And the second miracle for me was that I actually heard a voice in my head cut through all that noise and say, you're powerless over all of that, but you can give yourself a chance to get this thing. And I took my first newcomer chip that day. And that was January 25th, 1992, and I have not had a cocktail or a drug that wasn't prescribed by a doctor since then. And that's a little more than 16 and a half years ago, and it's a freaking miracle. And it's really a miracle because I knew, not only did I not meet the only requirement for membership, I knew this program was not going to work for me. The first time you read those steps, not only did the God word scare me, but there was something in that how it works thing that you read about rigorous honesty and half measures avail us nothing. Hell, I was Mr. Half Measures, you know? So I knew I was doomed. But I mentioned earlier, I'm an intellectual. And generally, I find that intellect is not my friend in spiritual matters. But in a weird kind of sideways way, it worked for me this time. Because like I said, I knew it wasn't going to work for me, but my busy head said, well, if you're going to prove it doesn't work for you, you're going to have to do all this stuff that they suggest. Otherwise, some dingbat is going to come up to you afterwards and say, well, maybe if you'd worked the steps, or maybe if you'd gone to 90 meetings in 90 days, maybe if you'd read the book. So I started doing all that stuff. And I think I had like a little 30-day deadline in my head to give it to work. And I know that before the 30 days, my first 30 days was up, I knew something was working, and I was here, and I wanted to stay. So, yeah, doing the stuff that everybody else was doing. Well, okay, one thing that seemed to be part of the program, the way I heard people talking, was something they called a slip, or a relapse. It seemed to be part of everybody's story, almost. So again, being a thinker, I started planning my relapse. Of course, in the first 30 days, I was also planning my circuit speaking career, but the relapse was the first thing to get through. And so here's what I was thinking about that. Apparently, you were supposed to relapse about something, so I made up a short list. I also figured that timing was critical. because I wanted to have enough of a foundation in the program that I would make it back, and yet I didn't want to wait so long that I'd be reluctant to give up the time. My mind is a dangerous place. Long story short, I never quite got around to that relapse yet, and hope that I don't have to. And I know that that is, a daily reprieve based on my maintenance of my spiritual condition. Now, I told you I made up the short list of things I could relapse about, and they all happened. One of the first, as I said, I was a gay man in the 70s, and I'd been testing for HIV for a few years by then, and I was still negative, but I'll be damned if 90 days into sobriety I didn't take my regular test, and this time it came up positive. And I remember early in sobriety seeing somebody who was dying of AIDS. I mean, within weeks, seeing him at a meeting and thinking, what the hell is he doing here? I would be so fucked up right now if I were him. But again, this God that I don't understand was looking out for me, because when I got my test results, I was working the third step with my sponsor. And it just, yes, the room started spinning for a minute, but when it slowed down, I remember thinking, this is something over which I am powerless, and I need to turn this over and just do the footwork like I'm doing with my alcoholism. I got home and called my sponsor, and he told me that he was also HIV positive, and he said that I needed to be sure to keep my recovery from alcoholism my focus, because alcoholism would kill me far quicker than any virus would. And that was amazingly good advice, and I continue to follow it to this day. And I'm reasonably healthy. I have an undetectable viral load 16 and a half years later. And then I also was going to get loaded if Jim got loaded, because my sponsor told me that I would. That if Jim got loaded, I would get high. And again, it was somewhere in that 90-day range when the Rodney King verdict came down, and we had the civil disobedience, they called it. And, I had to drive into Century City to pick up Jim, and it was like freaking War of the Worlds, people driving up on the sidewalks, and we got back and ran up to the corner 7-Eleven because it was going to be curfew. And I think we were the only people there not buying beer. But we were stocking up on our drugs, the sober drugs, cigarettes and Haagen-Dazs. And so we got back from the 7-Eleven, and I turned around and suddenly Jim wasn't there. And again, the chick with the crystal meth in the Battleship game was 2 doors down, and I wandered down the hall and peeked in, and there he was with a straw up his nose. And so I went back into the apartment and called my sponsor, and he gave me some instructions, which included getting on my knees and praying, which I did. And then I told Jim, I need to know whether you intend to continue doing this, because if you do, I've got 2 hours to find someplace else to stay tonight. And he didn't use any more than that one line. In fact, got a lot of shit from people after that he'd wasted a perfectly good relapse. But I didn't get high over that either. But I was going to get high if my sponsor did. And then he got loaded. And the first time it happened, it was all about me. How could he do this to me? This disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And I don't know why I haven't had to relapse yet. I'm just grateful that I haven't. And for those of you for whom that is part of your story, thank God you're back. Please keep coming back. You will. I don't think. I don't know. I guess a lot of people are afraid of judgment. All I think when I see somebody come back from a relapse is, thank God you're back. Please stay. So anyway, didn't end up relapsing over the sponsor getting high either. So about the time I realized that I wanted to stick around here, I looked around and thought, what are people doing that seem to be getting out of this program what I want to be getting out of it? And, aside from the really obvious getting a sponsor, going to meetings, reading the book, working the steps kind of stuff, the other thing I noticed was service. And I mentioned earlier I had trouble with the God thing. Fortunately, I went to a meeting early in sobriety where part of the format was to read the appendix in the back of the book about the spiritual experience, which was very, very helpful for me because it talks in that about, the book making it sound like at some point the clouds are going to part and the shaft of sunlight is going to come down and you will be stricken spiritual. But they didn't mean to give us that impression, and for a lot of us that isn't the case. For a lot of us the spiritual experience is of the slow educational variety, and that describes me. Earlier I mentioned God as I do not understand God, because I don't. There's a lot of things I don't understand about this program, and that's okay. Every meeting we read something from that chapter called How It Works. If it were up to me, which fortunately it isn't, they would rename that chapter, because no matter how many times I read it, I do not know how this thing works. I just know that it does, and I don't know what or who God is, but I know that there's something going on that, is... When I'm at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I can tangibly feel right now that there is something going on here that is bigger than the sum of us individuals put together. And I'm pretty sure that's what people are talking about when they talk about God. And when I'm helping another alcoholic or even just another human being, I can feel that there's something bigger going on. And I know that's what people are talking about when they talk about God. So I try to go to a lot of meetings and I try to do a lot of service. I don't think I would be alive today if it were not for the 12 steps and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the other 12-step fellowships. I'm living on bonus time now. And I am so grateful for the life I have today. I have friends, I have family. My family today is family of choice. I've been through a lot of loss in sobriety too. The last few years have been really, really rough for me. I've lost both of my parents. Jim, the guy I got sober with, at almost 10 years of sobriety, he started drinking again. And that's when I got my ass to Al-Anon again. This time I actually heard what they were saying. I kept going to Al-Anon and AA and hoped he would find this program again, and he went in and out and in and out. And, the sad news is he's still drinking today. I try to maintain a friendship with him, but it's difficult to be a friend with a practicing alcoholic. But, I love him, and again, I hope he finds his way back here one of these days. But I realize some of us don't survive the bottoms we have to hit. But I also believe that we can choose our bottom by deciding not to dig any deeper, I didn't have to go to prison or suffer some of the really cruel blows that this disease can deal out before I got sober. And again, I don't know why. Like I say, I didn't meet the only requirement when I got here. But I felt the love. And that's what keeps me coming back. I've struggled a lot with depression in sobriety. I've had people suggest to me that if you work the 12 steps properly, that's not going to happen. Well, unfortunately, that hasn't been my experience. Life is still in session. And I was told when I was new that some days just getting through the day without picking up a drink or a drug was going to be as good as it got. And that was going to have to be enough. And some days that's still the best I've got. But that's pretty fucking good still. Today, I actually worked in the field of recovery, and that's a blessing. But boy, it just means I have to work a harder program myself. You know, I do have this incredible life today, but along with it comes this responsibility that my sense of well-being, my happiness, are my responsibility now, you know? And I'm not always graceful at this thing. The 11th step is still really, really difficult for me. In fact, I live just a couple miles from here. I haven't been to a lot of meetings at the Marina Center since I got sober, although I did go that first day when I had a busy day scheduled, because I never memorized the 7th step prayer. It seemed like everybody at these meetings had. The sort of King James Bible English just makes me nervous. I hear people talk about, you know, the sort of God that I learned about in church as a child and feeling cradled in God's arms, and that sounds really attractive to me, but it doesn't, I can't wrap my brain around it. Again, the most specific my concept of a higher power is at this point is probably more like the Force in Star Wars than an old man up in the sky, you know. I know that there are, you know, forces of chaos and evil, and I know that there's something, like I say, that brings us together, and it's about love, and that's what I know is God. So I try to connect with that as much as I can. I'm trying to think of something really wise to say to wrap up with. Again, I just know that that if I hadn't found this program, my life would almost certainly be over. And if it weren't over, I would probably wish that it was. You know, this is a simple program for complicated people. I just need to show up one day at a time, go to a meeting, tell the truth, call my sponsor. And as long as I keep taking the simple suggestions that I got when I first started coming to these meetings, I'm okay. In fact, even when I think I'm not okay, if I just sort of look around and go, right here, right now, do I have what I need? Am I okay? I always am. I'm really grateful to be surrounded by people that I love and who love me. And if you're in this room and we haven't met yet, I love you anyway. We just haven't had a chance to get to know each other yet. I hope you all keep coming back, because I know I'm going to, and I really appreciate being able to come out and work my 12th step with you guys today. Thanks a lot.